questions. So please don't hesitate to ask. So I always start every presentation. A few of you have probably seen this a few times. I got to put the reason I like this area of the law, why it's so important to me. And our little buddy over there. I don't know why I always start with this. I do. It just reminds me of why I do this for a living and love doing it. So this is kind of picking up where we had done a presentation, I guess about a month or so ago, and I really have just treated this as, like I said earlier, like I do just normal client consultations. And anytime I meet with a transitioning special needs family, which is where our special needs loved one is getting near that 18 range. That's what I call transitioning. I think most of you do too. There's three areas that I always cover with the family. And it's kind of a set spiel that I've developed over time that I feel like addresses the primary issues that the family either is there to talk about or hasn't identified yet, but they will need to address it at some point. So those three things, yeah. So it's when you turn 18, as my son is put there. So decision-making assistance, that's really where we spent most of our last session on. That's the whole question of how do we help our loved ones make decisions as they turn 18 and become an adult in the eyes of the law. That's the whole conversation about, powers of attorney versus guardianship and what's the best fit there, or is there some hybrid thereof? That's that whole conversation. And that's always the first topic we have to address, because we can't really do anything else for our loved one until we've addressed that specific topic. And then we always talk about coordinating benefits. We'll hit more on this here in a little bit, but everything changes when we're 18. If we're on TEFRA, that goes away. If we're on our kids, that goes away. I wasn't eligible for SSI when I was 17, but now that I'm 18, I am. That whole ball of wax, all that occurs at age 18. And then we always talk about what I'm calling planning for the future. And that's really where we're going to spend our time today. This is, once we've kind of got our decision-making paradigm sort of lined out for a little while, we figure out what benefits we're going to be utilizing moving forward. Then how does that look long-term? What are we going to do to support our loved one and keep the benefits they need moving forward? And that's really where we're going to spend our time concentrated today, on that third leg of the stool, so to speak. So planning for the long term. I don't know why I'm not even sure I put that picture in there. Somebody else put the picture of our dog in there. I'm not sure what that was about. So before we start talking about solutions, let's just kind of flesh it out. What is the problem that we're trying to address, or what is the issue that we're trying to address? So get this out of the way here. So, as it says, typically special needs children rely on 3 government programs. This has kind of changed over the years. It used to say 2. I've added a third. So in much of this you may already know, but let's just kind of get everybody on the same page. So we have SSI. That's a monthly benefit. That's just cash to our loved one to help them out. It is below the federal poverty level. It is a relatively small amount of money, but it is just a cash benefit to help them survive and live in the world. It is currently an $800 a month range. In January, I believe it changes to $913 a month. And that's our financial support such that it is. And then there's Medicaid. So Medicaid is not really a health insurance program per se. It's a health payment program that is often the key way we're going to provide medical care for our loved ones moving forward. Because it's available to those that don't have many financial resources, and it covers lots of things that a traditional, just off the shelf, Blue Cross or United plan, something like that, would never cover. Are your typical employer-sponsored health plan, lots of times does not address many of the issues that we find in a special needs environment. So Medicaid is important for both of those reasons. And then, over the past years, the program that is just as important of all the others and is related is waiver. A lot of our clients either are receiving waiver services or hope to at some point in time, and it's a critical component. And as our overall programs are developed, I would submit that waiver is really as important as any other, because that's what in large part allows our loved ones to stay home as long as possible, which is the design of the plan. So we have all these plans. We've identified all this in our coordination of benefits conversation. How are we going to, what combination of these we're going to be using, or hopefully using all three? And that, what does that look? We need to utilize these, but we've got to keep them long-term, okay? And that can be a challenge because these programs are means tested. So that means, and I don't mean the pun, that means there are financial criteria that we have to meet in order to keep these. So let's see. This is just talking about Medicaid eligibility, kind of another deal. And when we're talking about Medicaid now, we're really, I'm rolling waiver into that. Medicaid, traditional Medicaid for health reasons, and Medicaid waiver have two different set of financial criteria so they're not 100% the same, but for purposes of this conversation today, I'm going to just talk about Medicaid in general, and I'm really meaning both. Just understand, it gets beyond the scope of our conversation today, but the guidelines are slightly different, but we're just going to talk about Medicaid in general. We've already talked about that. Why Medicaid's important. Why is SSI important? Lots of folks, it's the only source of income for the beneficiary. Even if they're staying home with mom and dad still have to have help with rent, groceries, utilities, all these things. How are we going to do that? What's going to help that family out? SSI is going to do that. But there's another critical component that I really want to take some time to talk about. And that is SSI is a driving force behind maintaining Medicaid. And anytime I'm talking with clients in our office, I always kind of pause a minute and I'll say, look, what I'm about to tell you, if you walk out of here learning one thing, this is what I want you to learn. This drives really all of our decision making, almost all of it moving forward. This one key component. So let's kind of slow down a second and make sure you understand this principle we're about to talk about and why it's so important. This drives everything we do from here on out, okay? I need Medicaid. I need Medicaid because it's my access to health care, and I need Medicaid because I want waiver services. I was on the waiting list for 8, 9, 10 years. We just now got off of it. This is a key component. Or my loved one is at Civitan, Pathfinders, Easter Seals, wherever, and they're using waiver services to pay their bill. So I have to have Medicaid. There's a link between SSI and Medicaid. If I can apply for SSI and qualify for only $1, that's all I have to do. I just have to get $1 a month of SSI. I automatically get Medicaid with it. So as we think about how are we going to support our loved one longer term, it really revolves around maintaining SSI eligibility. Because I've got my monthly cash benefit, which is helpful. I don't want to gloss over that. $913 a month is very helpful to the family. But arguably more important, I have maintained my Medicaid eligibility by virtue of keeping SSI. That paradigm drives everything we're going to talk about the rest of the day. That's the whole thing. That's in our little purple link. That's the best little picture I could come up with to demonstrate this, linking those two together. That's a critical concept. It's a critical lesson. And as you are thinking about how you're going to support your loved one long-term and after you're gone, this has to be the underlying premise of everything we do. Okay. We've already kind of hit on some of this. So here's our issue, right? To maintain eligibility, I generally can't have more than $2,000 in resources. For the waiver, that's a little higher, but we're just for conversation purposes, we're just going to call it $2,000. And my income has to be less than $913 a month beginning in January. That's the two components that Social Security will look at and determine in our SSI eligibility. In addition to the medical component, I have to be disabled, clearly, but that's in most of the cases that we're going to talk about, that's not really an issue. We talked about that. There's some exceptions. We're not really going to spend time getting into that. I just want to hit high level concepts today so that you understand the basic issue.
Mr. Thomas?
Yes.
Since we're on the subject and may remain on the SSI, we did have a question from Miss Cynthia Ram.
Yeah.
And the question is, have you heard of the Pickle Amendment? Let you keep Medicaid even if you lose SSI eligibility?
Yes, and that gets into the exceptions. There's all sorts of little caveats. There are, and you know, all we can do in a presentation like this is talk in broad terms. But yes,
Okay.
there are carve outs specific to each family. Some of it depends on if you're working or not.
Okay.
There's actually 3 or 4 different programs that allow a beneficiary to work and earn money and retain SSI. Sometimes it's for some set period of time. Sometimes it's based on how much they make. I mean, there's honestly more variations of that than I can even keep up with.
Okay.
There are programs that allow that. So we're talking in generalities, you know.
Okay.
Yeah, there are some specific exceptions that can be done.
She added also, she thinks it's like $1,350 in monthly income based on the SSA website. So I guess that would be a good place to check for any of these little.
Yeah, not for SSI,
Evidence.
not for now for a married couple. It does jump up for a married couple.
Okay.
For a single person, it will be $913 in January, but the $1,350 may be the married couple part. Possible.
Thank you.
There is a little bit more for a married couple. The point is, of all that, and thank you very much, because you know, hey, look, this is complicated stuff, and I often say, any one person who says they've got their arms around this whole thing and know everything about it, be nervous. Be nervous. It is a lot. I mean, we do this for a living, and I make no claim at all to be fully immersed in all the ins and outs and to it. I think the biggest thing that families take away from something like this is issue awareness, spot issues, so we don't get behind the 8 ball and then try to research the situation that fits your family specifically. I think that's the key.
True.
That's really a goal of something like today, is just teach general broad principles. And obviously everything has to be tailored to the individual family. But as a general principle, though, we're kind of back to the problem. This is my problem. How can I possibly leave anything to my son if I have an asset cap of nominally $2,000? It's more like $8,000 for the waiver, but the general principle is I can't leave him any meaningful amount of money. If I have a $500,000 term life insurance and I pass away, he cannot be the beneficiary of that life insurance as a general principle. I can't leave him my home. I can't leave him there's all these sorts of issues. So that's a problem, right? Because $913 a month is helpful, but I'd like to do something more for him than that. That's not necessarily going to be enough to really sustain him if something happened to us. So how can I leave him a legacy or inheritance that's going to support him longer term in a way that makes me feel better, and keep the Medicaid and the waiver, which is absolutely critical. Okay. So these next slide I'm going to hit these things. It says solution or problems, because as you might imagine, people have identified this issue for a long time, longer than I've been in practice, and have come up with all sorts of ways to try to deal with it in their own way. And I don't blame anybody for any of this. We all do what we, for our loved ones, we just do what we can. So some say, I'm going to leave my inheritance to my son's brother or cousin or uncle or something. And there's just kind of a wink and a nod that they know they're supposed to use that for his or her benefit. Hear that a lot. Hear that one a lot. Literally have a lot of people just bury stuff in the backyard. And that's not a joke. I mean, it's just real. I mean, just take it and literally just bury it in the backyard. And there's a piece of paper somewhere that tells somebody where to go find it. And I'm not exaggerating. It happens. I'm sure somewhere in Arkansas happens once a day. I'm going to take money that was my child's and I'm going to sweep it into my account or someone else's account, or put it in my other child's account. That's a solution a lot of people will take. So there's challenges with all of that, right? And we have these conversations all the time. So if I give my money to my other child, what if he goes bankrupt, gets sued, gets divorced, passes away? And I've had about every single one of those things happen. We've seen just about all that. And you could list go on. Decide they're having tough times and they were really well-meaning, but they just had to get in and get it. The point of that is, I don't really know that money I'm leaving to someone else is really going to be there and available for my disabled son the way I intended for it to. There's no way for me to really know that, feel comfortable with it. Life happens. So that's a bit of a challenge. If I just got money sitting around, what if it gets stolen? I mean, that happens all the time. And then if I'm just sweeping the account, is that fraud? Certainly nobody intended for it to be. I mean, nobody woke up and said, I'm going to commit Medicaid fraud today. But when I take money out of an account, or money that was really payable to my son, and I essentially sweep it or hide it in another account, I have by definition committed Medicaid fraud. And that, again, that's strong words. Nobody ever meant that or realized that or thought about that, but that's really what we're doing. So I submit that none of those very common solutions that we all see every day in Arkansas are very good solutions at all, in my opinion. And for some people, some families, this top one, this just may be where your comfort level is. You're going to give this to your uncle and you're absolutely certain that's going to work out fine. And if you're, if that's the way you want to do it, that's the way you want to do it. But generally, these aren't real good solutions. So that's the problem. Good news is we got a couple of really, really good solutions to this issue that are designed for the problems that we're trying to address, that are 100% legal, that are written into law, and are used day in and day out nationwide to solve these issues. And for somebody, for me especially, who I get to see this play out on a common basis, I'm very comfortable with it. The first solution, and really the one we're going to talk about today, is a special needs trust. We've talked about able accounts in the past. we might hit that for just a quick second, but that's not really the emphasis of that. I know there's been lots of presentations on able accounts over time. And so that's not really where we're going to spend a lot of effort on that today, but we, if there's a question at the end, we can certainly address it. So then let's talk about what is a trust? And we always do this in my office on a whiteboard. We draw this out. This is the first question is, well, I've heard of a trust, and maybe you kind of sort of know in general what it is. You've heard of them, but what is it? What is this thing called a trust? So let's talk about that. So in any time we're having this conversation, even regardless of having a special needs child, there's a few parties at play. This first party, you see it down here at the bottom, is a grantor. That's me. So I have something that I want to grant to someone eventually. Not now, but after I'm gone, I want to grant it to somebody. And that somebody I want to grant it to is a beneficiary, my son in this case. So if I use traditional estate planning, just a will, something like that, or I don't do anything at all, and I just let the laws of the state of Arkansas kind of dictate what happens. The good news is whatever I have will end up going to my son. It will end up going over. It'll go through a process called probate, which is its own can of worms, and it will get there. But the problem is now he has taken title to it. He's no longer eligible for Medicaid or SSI or waiver or any of that. So that's the problem initially. But here's how we deal with it. Here's what a trust does. A trust introduces a third party to this mix. And by the way, we're talking about this in a special needs context today. We use trust all the time with no special needs conversation at all because it bypasses probate and is generally just a much easier, cost-effective, efficient way to handle your affairs. So this trust is not anything unusual. We're doing this all the time, and we being every practitioner in the state. So the trustee is a third party that holds the assets, but has to use them as the trust document says. Okay? But they hold legal title to it. So what we do, we say, okay, I don't like this model down here. This becoming ineligible for Medicaid doesn't work very well. So now I'm going to send everything to this trustee of my special needs trust, who will then use it per the trust document for the benefit of my son. So now he's got all the benefit of it, but he doesn't have legal title to it. So now my $500,000 term life policy is held up here. This is great. I've been able to use all this money. It's held up here by this trustee, and they're using it for his benefit. They are paying rent, food, clothing, sending him on vacation once a year, whatever, durable medical equipment that needed to be had, almost anything you can think of. The trust is buying it for them, but we're not necessarily just giving him large wads of money, which in some cases is actually a benefit in and of itself, because sometimes our beneficiary really doesn't need to be holding on a lot. Special needs aside, just isn't a good spendthrift. So that's the basic framework of a trust and how it works. We just say, look, the beneficiary can't have it. So all we got to do is introduce this third party up here, and that's who's going to hold it. But they have very specific instructions of what to do with it, and they're duty bound to follow those instructions. So that's the trust. The trust can hold a lot of things. This is another great thing about a trust, and this comes up a lot. I'm sorry, in Arkansas. So money's obvious. I can put a home in my trust. It can own a car. If I've got family land, I intend to leave in the family, that would have knocked them off eligibility. I can do that. We do that a lot in rural Arkansas. So it can hold the obvious, liquid money, but it can hold anything really. And we've set up special needs trusts in the past strictly just to hold land and houses. So that's kind of a neat benefit of the trust. So what makes a special needs trust different from any other trust? The trust I'm telling you about that we do day in and day out is just part of just normal, regular family estate planning. A few things kind of sets it apart. And the first thing I would say is you go out on Google and do your research online and stuff, you'll see the term supplemental needs trust. It's basically the same thing, different name for the same thing. It states clearly the assets should be used for the benefit of our child. So there's a fiduciary duty, highest level of duty the law recognizes for the trustee to use it for their care. Distributions are made for the benefit of our child, not directly to them. That's a bit of a unique aspect of a special needs trust. And this is really the key, this last one. The beneficiary, our child, special needs child, has no absolute right to demand anything. So, you might set up a trust for a grandchild that can go to the trustee and say, look, you're supposed to give me $500 a month or this or that. And the trustee has to follow that distribution request. In a special needs trust context, there is no absolute right to demand anything. And that, as far as Social Security is concerned, is the deciding factor that yes, this is special needs, and it's not owned by the beneficiary because they have no right to walk in the bank office or wherever and say, give it to you. So that's really the one element that has to be included in the special needs trust. So as you can imagine, if the beneficiary doesn't have the right to actually walk in and say, give me this or pay for that, having the proper trustee is very, very important, right? Because if we're going to give everything to this trustee, we're trusting him to take care of our child with it. It has to be the right trustee. It has to be the right fit. And I just can't stress that enough. And often when we becoming, engaged with a client beyond our first consultation and really start doing some family planning, we will spend a lot of time talking about who is the right trustee, who or what is the right trustee. It is often a meeting in and of itself. We typically try to have you meet at least a couple of different trustees and kind of an interview type process. That's how important it is. We spend almost as much or more time selecting the proper trustee than we do actually going over documents and all that sort of thing. Because the trust is only as good as the trustee. I mean, we can draw out the best trust document in the world and fund it with more money than it's ever going to need. But if we don't have a trustee that understands the need of the beneficiary, understands a little bit of who we're coordinating with the family, who understands how special needs trust work in general, if we don't have someone that has the background of that and the want to, that's a big part of it, it's all for naught. So here are a few things about what kind of ineffective trustee do. So I don't want to spend too much time on this. I think it's obvious, but if you have a trustee who doesn't know what they're doing, it could easily suspend benefits, which is, especially in a waiver context, is a terrible outcome. Might cause the trust funds to be depleted way too early. And listen, forecasting and planning and investing in the context of a special needs trust is its own thing. It is a unique thing. It is not something the average person does by any means, and it is definitely not something the average financial advisor does. It's its own animal. It requires, in my view, a little bit of special training. And then obviously you can cause some tax issues for everyone involved if you have a trustee who doesn't really understand what's going on. But a good trustee can do a lot of things. A good trustee can increase quality of life for sure. So we can make sure child's in a good place, living in a good place. Trustees who know what they're doing can get money to the beneficiary in ways that are easily accessible for groceries and that sorts of thing. Perhaps utilize an enable account, things called TrueLink cards. A good trustee knows that we can pay for vacation once a year. We can do a lot of things to increase quality of life for sure. If we have a trustee that knows what they're doing, that's the key. Because a lot of getting a little bit off topic here, but I think it's important to address. There's a number of institutions that will accept, that'll be their term, a special needs trust, but they're really kind of scared of it. They don't really know what to do. They just know they don't need to lose benefits, and that's their key thing. And so what the result of that is, they won't actually distribute anything because they're kind of in this analysis paralysis role. And we see this from time to time. Well-meaning folks who took on the special needs trust, but all they really know is, man, I don't want to lose benefits, so I'm just going to take this exceptionally conservative approach and not really spend any money. And that's not right either. The key is to find one who really knows what the rules are and utilizes the funds appropriately. Obviously, a good trustee needs to preserve assets as long as possible. Listen, the Social Security regulations, this is a constant moving target, constant. And we'll get to this in a minute, but this change in regulations, why I often argue a family member trustee is not normally a good solution, because this is a full-time job keeping up with this. There's no question about it. Yeah, and help a special needs child for years. So who is a good trustee? Family members. This is a lot of times where our conversation starts. With a family, they have a trusted loved one. They want to be the trustee. They've agreed to do it. They've talked about it. And I'm not going to try to talk anybody out of that. I just, there's some challenges you got to think your way through. If I have a family member who is now trustee, that family member is also probably one of, if not the most important person in my son's life. If I passed away and I've named a family member, uncle, as the trustee of his special needs trust, he's probably also the one who's there for him day to day. But here's the problem. Now I've introduced a situation where beloved uncle, has got to tell my son no. And that I may have created a situation that could actually work an affirmative harm, because now my son, he knows there's a trust, he knows there's money. Why can't I have a new Corvette? I would like that new Mustang I saw online. I want this, I want that. I want to go to Disney World every other month. And now I put them in a situation where he's got to say no. I may have inadvertently created a situation where I'm adding complexity to an already complex relationship. Okay. My uncle, great guy, greatest guy in the world. I trust him anything I had. That does not mean he knows how to invest money for trust investing. And he will know what the beneficiary needs, but he's not really sure what he can do without getting out of the Medicaid or SSI eligibility. So I put a lot on a family member doing this. And I think that's the real key takeaway. Can a family member do it? Yes. We represent family members that serve as trustees of special needs trust, but we give them a lot of help. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think that's got to be an expectation. If we're going to appoint a family member, they're going to have to understand that they're going to need a lot of help and they're going to need to ask a lot of questions. And they need to have, they're going to have some legal help to navigate their way through that. So that's why a lot of times my obvious preference and something I want people to consider, it's not required, just consider, is a professional trustee. And so professional trustees, there's corporate trust departments typically at banks. In Arkansas, we have one standalone trust company. It is not a bank. It's just all they do for a living is trust. And these are people who do this for a living. They do trust every day. And that tends to have a lot of benefits. So they know the regulations because they're doing this for a living, and it's that they're keeping up with regulations as they develop and change. They know an awful lot about investing funds for children and beneficiaries over the long term. Most of the time, there's full teams of people within the trust department. That's what they're doing. And this is, as you can imagine, has some level of complexity to it, and they've got the resources to handle that aspect correctly. And they're still going to work with the family. And here's the scenario that I almost always at least ask clients to consider. There's two roles. I don't have a slide for this. I'm just going to go into it. There's two real primary roles for our children should something happen to us. We got the trustee of the special needs trust. We've talked about that extensively and what they're doing. But there's also a guardian. I should nominate a guardian for my son in my last will and testament should something happen to me. Doesn't matter if I got anything to give away in a will or not. I can use my will simply to nominate my proposed guardian or my preferred guardian. So what I like the family considered, I'm going to appoint a good professional trustee as my trustee, and I'm going to meet one or two of them and get a feel for what institution I feel good about, put a face to the name, kind of know what's going on there. And then I'm going to take my uncle, whom I love dearly, who will be my son's primary support, and I'm going to name him as the guardian. That trustee should be interacting with the guardian to know how best to help my son. And now I've created this team environment where I've got a good trustee and I got a good guardian, and my son's benefiting from all that. In my opinion, many times that's a good model, and certainly utilizes the benefits of a special needs trust to its maximum potential, I believe. Of course, knowing which trust department to go to is a big one. So we're very blessed here in Arkansas. There are a handful of institutions that are happy to take a special needs trust, are proactive in that area, and seek them out. There are a lot of institutions who don't want to work with them. They're scared of them. They say, well, I'm only going to take it if it's a bare minimum $1 million. There's a whole lot of trust departments that do fantastic trust work, great institutions, but they really don't want to take a special needs trust. And increasingly over time, will just flat out just tell you no. I think for a long time it was kind of a grudging, yeah, we'll accept it, but you're kind of seeing that go away. But the good news is there are institutions in Arkansas and around the country that do want to be in that space, and and are proactive in being in it. And then just kind of one last thing, I'll throw this out because I've been talking for a long time. Y'all got to be tired of this. There's another kind of special needs trust. So what we're talking about today mainly is a special needs trust the family establishes on its own. There are pooled trusts. There's kind of scattered around the country, and they're big trusts that you can join. So instead of having the Thomas Smith Special Needs Trust, what I do is I'm joining a pooled trust and getting a sub account under it. They're trying to solve with these things. They're trying to solve a few different issues. It's groups of people that have pooled money, and you have your own sub account. And initially, there's a few reasons why these were kind of attractive. The first one is the joining fee is typically a little less, not much, but a little less than having your own trust prepared. So the entry point of it is a little lower, although what I'm seeing today, that's not that gap isn't what it once was. But here's the real big deal. They generally have almost no minimum. So they're a good little spot. If you got a relatively modest amount of money, maybe it doesn't justify drafting your own special needs trust, finding your trustee, and we can't find a trustee to take it. Say it's a $50,000 trust, something like that, which is an awful lot of money. Don't get me wrong, but in trust world, that's hard. That's hard to make that work for that kind of money. So a pooled trust is a real good place to put that. I can take, I think a normal fee was probably like $1,500 to join it, but they'll take my $50,000. They'll take my $35,000. They'll take that, and I can at least keep it over there and still maintain Medicaid and SSI eligibility, and get the benefits of the more traditional trusts that we've talked about for most of this presentation. I personally have a lot of interest in these. I haven't had any clients go there yet, but I do have several clients that we're probably moving that direction. So it's definitely something we want to keep our eye on as a potential tool to use. But traditionally in Arkansas hasn't been utilized to a great extent.
Thomas, I have a question.
Yeah.
Miss Catherine May's question is, can you be a guardian and trustee?
Yes. It's
Thank you.
It's not probably not advisable. I mean, there's no real prohibition against it, but it's not advisable.
Thank you.
Yeah. No, but I mean, if I had to seek court appointment of a guardian who also intended to be trustee, I would absolutely disclose that, just and flesh it out, and at a hearing, tell the judge here why we think this is okay. Kind of flesh it out that way. But is there a law that says you can't do that? Karen, I'm sorry, I've talked a long time. I just have maybe two more slides. Should I keep going? So two last things I want you to know. I see this a lot. What if my child inherits some money? What if my child got some money in a personal injury settlement or something like that? Don't panic. I hear this all the time. Spend down, spend down, spend down. That is, if your child is on SSI and waiver and Medicaid and inherits $1 million tomorrow, you do not have to spend down $1. That is simply well-meaning but incorrect information and is generally a waste. If you end up with a child who has come across some assets or resources through some unexpected means, and you're concerned about eligibility, contact me or somebody, because you can we can deal with that. You can create your own special needs trust and dump it in there and preserve eligibility and not have to spend down anything. So that is a often missed benefit of a special needs trust that shouldn't be, because it hurts me. It just breaks my heart a lot of times. I've heard of people, well, I got this $50,000 and I had to go spend it down real fast. That, man, no, no, we don't have to do that. And that was probably not a good use of the money a lot of times. Not always. I mean, sometimes it is, but so just issue awareness there. If you find yourself in that situation, before you go spend down, call somebody. And then the last thing I want to hit today, this is also something that gets missed a lot. There's a common misconception that my child's child support disqualified him or her from SSI or Medicaid because that's income to him or her. Now he's over the income, or she's over the income limit. Again, that's the special needs trust is an easy fix for this. In Arkansas, we should create what's called the first party special needs trust and simply pay the child support into that. And that solves the issue. It's written into the regulations. And here's the deal. In Arkansas, a special needs child, A, can receive child support for life. It does not have to end at 18, and in fact, should not. And B, can get the child support and the SSI. You just got to pay it into the trust. They can benefit from both. And that is a huge deal for some families. And again, that's another thing. When I see that they're not really utilizing everything they could use, it's tough to see sometimes because it's just misinformation. The disabled child should get child support for life and should still get the SSI Medicaid. We just got to utilize the tools available to us, and a special needs trust can solve that problem as well. So that's pretty key, obviously. Karen, I've been talking a long time. I'm sure everybody's tired of listening to me at this point. I
we
think
do
there
have
may
a
be
question.
a slide or two on here, but I mean, I think we've probably talked about that enough.
It's
So,
been very informative, Thomas. I've even been writing down notes, and I consider myself an elder in this situation. But anyway, I've been making notes. We do have a question.
yeah,
Miss Catherine May, in relationship, going back a little bit, maybe, which should you set up first? Trust and trustee or will, or at the same time?
it's all the same. So we do it all at the same time. So it is the family's estate plan, and they'll do, Catherine, you would do a healthcare power of attorney for you and your husband, a general power of attorney for you and your husband. You would both do a last will and testament. Potentially a trust just for probate avoidance on your stuff, and then you add the special needs. It's just an estate plan like you do for every other family, with the simple addition that we're adding a special needs trust to it to serve as a catch hold for our special needs child's thing, whatever we intended to leave there. That's all.
Thank you. Miss Cynthia has a couple of questions.
Yeah.
The first question, would you mind sharing perhaps your top 3 professional trust departments that will handle the special needs trust?
I don't know where this goes after this or how long
Okay.
it takes online.
Okay. So we each need to research. Okay. Her second question is, how do we find or vet corporate trust departments? I think she's wanting to know, I guess, in researching, how do we find these corporate trust departments?
Yeah, well, again, that's part of what we do. Part of what we do is we try to stay in contact with all of them, and it's an ongoing relationship with them, But some things I would ask you to do. You can Google up easily special needs trustee in Arkansas. That'd be a good start. You can and reach out to them. I'd say this, if you pull up a web page for a trust department, in almost every bank has, and you don't even see special needs trusts listed,
Mhm.
that's not where you want to go. You know, it's what I have found over time is that there are a handful that really want to be in this space, and they make an intentional effort to be. And I see them. So there is one thing that's real important to me. Every year in St. Petersburg, Florida, there is a nationwide conference that does nothing but emphasize special needs trust and developments throughout the year.
Okay.
Trustees that go to that's a lot of times that's the ones I want to be talking to. They're making they're going to the time and expense and effort to stay educated
True.
on special needs trust, and it's a small world. This is a niche within a niche of the law. You know, it's a very small, and so that's the kind of folks. But you know, if you're talking to the trust department, they'll almost always be happy to just meet with you, come by, chat. But you know, ask what's your thoughts on special needs trust. Ask them if they got a minimum. If they start telling you they want 7-figure minimums, they're not really wanting to be in that space. They'll take it because they'll go and take your $1 million or something, but they're really, that's not really where they want to be. So real high minimums to me is a turn off. That's not a good fit. And so those are a few things that I look for.
Miss Cynthia wanted to let you know also that your presentation has been great.
Oh,
And Miss Teresa Hendricks sent me a text. She had to leave to go on to another call, but she said that you did a great job.
Well, thank you.
And Miss Tracy Harris, she has a question, and her question is there a fee for these services? And I'm thinking maybe she's meaning for the
Trustee.
Yeah, the trustee.
Yeah. Yes, they do charge. They charge typically anywhere from 1% to 3% of the assets under management. The key to that is that's assets under management. So they're not, if I set up a special needs trust for my son, and I have an institution, which I do, named as the successor trustee, they're not actually charging a fee until I die and it gets funded. So you're not paying them anything, just the name in a document. But they will charge a fee, again, generally between 1% and 3%, whatever's there. And I would tell you, my personal opinion about fees relative to special needs trust, I kind of like to see a little bit of a higher fee, because that means they actually intend on doing something.
Right.
You know, this isn't the kind of trust that I want a minimum fee. You know,
Mm-hmm.
we can find someone to do just a probate of a regular family trust for 1% all day. That's not necessarily what I want for my son's special needs trust.
Understood. And I'm thinking on a personal side, I'm thinking that with a bank or so, they're going to be bonded, and their insurance,
Yes.
the FDIC, that's going to cover.
Yes.
I mean, even in the case of fraud, that you would still be covered.
You would,
Depending on,
and here's the deal: their banks normally, they're chartered. Even if they don't have banking, they're still chartered as a bank.
okay.
And so they don't just disappear, right? I mean, they may merge with other entities over time, but you don't pull up to the front door and there's not a business sign. They're regulated. like
Exactly.
that, you know?
Exactly.
So they may, you know, you may pull up and there's a different name on the door at some point in time, but the institution and trust itself didn't go away.
Okay.
That's
Any more questions? I'm sorry.
That happens all the time.
Okay. Well, sure. We see that. Mr. Thomas had provided his phone number if you wanted to call him direct, and secure his services perhaps, and or have more questions. We greatly appreciate you, Thomas, in providing this information to us. Miss Kathy and Miss Tracy both also replied with thanks, and that was very good information. And others are chiming in saying, thank you, thank you. So very grateful. And TCFEF is also grateful. This webinar has been recorded, And I guess information will be provided at a later date as far as how it will be either on our website, tcfef.org, which we encourage you to visit often, as new information is always being added. And if you're interested in receiving our newsletter, the TCFEF has the newsletter from the organization that is going to be coming out. One just came out and another in December, and then it's going quarterly, but it's an e-newsletter. But we also have the teen and young adult newsletter that is going out quarterly. So if you're interested in receiving either or both, don't hesitate to contact us either by Facebook and or through Messenger, and or giving us a call at our toll-free number with Miss Michelle and letting us know, providing your email address, and she'll be happy to put you on the list to receive our newsletter. And there you will also receive information on upcoming events and or webinars. Please, before you exit totally today, go on and complete the survey that we have available. And again, I thank you and I wish you all safe and happy holidays. Thanks, Thomas.